Don't you get so mad when you see a troll in the comment of one of my videos say, NASCAR racing is just turning left, it's so easy? Well, it turns out they're right. Because to be quite honest with you guys, the thing that I see most from beginners and intermediate level oval drivers is the tendency to overcomplicate what they're doing. What I always tell people is that oval racing is 80% knowledge and 20% execution. The execution does not need to be difficult. What is difficult though is setting yourself up so that the execution is easy. So today I'm going to go over 5 things that I do universally in oval racing to make it easier on myself. Number 1 is probably the most important of it all, and it is setting up the corner entry angle. I harp on this a lot on this channel, and rightfully so, because it is really that important. And not only that, but a lot of the times what I see is people know that information, they understand it, but when it comes time to execute, they just cannot get themselves to do it. So let me break it down in as objective terms as possible as I can once again and see if you are truly doing this or if you are doing it just a little bit wrong. For the vast majority of oval tracks, large and small, my goal is to have my nose pointed to the line where I want to go before the banking transitions into the corner. So as you see right here, when I am turning into the corner seems to be on the straightaway, but it is just setting up my angle. I'm not coming down the track very far by that point, but when I hit the banking, my left front tire is pointed directly at the bottom line where I want to go. The reason that this motion makes everything simpler is that you are no longer fighting your car to the bottom. You know exactly where the car is going and you don't have to steer the course correction in any way to get it where you want to go. What is very common for people to do is to take a more intuitive racing line, sometimes turning in much later than when the banking transitions, and suddenly they have to input an amount of steering to get to where they want to go that is inconsistent compared to how they entered the corner. My goal for corner entry is to have one turn to the left and have that steering almost completely still by the time I get to the bottom, with any modulation in line coming from my use of trail brake. My goal with all of these tips is to limit the amount of variables, leave as little changing as possible, and make sure that what is changing is easily controllable by us. And of course, it does get a little more complicated than this, but not until very high levels that the vast majority of people aren't at already. Number 2 is the transfer between brake and throttle. The way that I simplify this for myself is to make a rule that I can only be on one pedal at a time. Never both, never neither. Intuitively, this makes sense because the vast majority of the time that we are on the brake, it is trail braking. And when we are on the throttle, it is of course to maintain momentum or speed up. One of the biggest misconceptions about oval racing and about racing in general is that trail braking is used to slow down the car and rotate the car. But that's not true. Especially in these big, fast oval cars, when you're trail braking between 10 and 20%, you are barely affecting the speed of the car over just coasting. So the main and honestly the only purpose of trail braking is for rotation. When you leave gaps in between the brake and the throttle in a corner, you are just subtracting the amount of time that you could be getting extra rotation from your car. And the more that you can get your car rotated early, the earlier that you can get back on the gas and maintain more momentum. And you don't want to overlap your pedals because the way that the physics work is that when you're on both the brake and the gas at the same time, it actually straightens out the car, which is counterproductive to the point of the trail brake in the first place. Now, doing this pedal technique is not the only way to do it. I want to make that clear. There are very good, very fast people who overlap their brake and their throttle in certain situations. The most common being when you are actually loose on entry and you want to keep the right rear under you as you reach the center of the corner. But for me personally, I never break that rule because of my muscle memory more than anything. And it's better to have a muscle memory of doing the no overlap and no gap method than it is to have muscle memory of overlapping your brake and your throttle and having that be a detriment when you go to a track where that's just not good at all. The trickiest part of all of this is knowing when to transfer from your brake to your throttle. And that's the part that takes the most practice and the most execution. But in general, what we've gone over before is that you want to wait for the weight transfer. And so once again, we limit the other variable, the steering wheel, in order to know when the best time to transfer the brake to the throttle is. The most universal rule for this is that without any steering motion, you want the car to be able to stick to the line that it is on, or even turn down the hill if that's an option. Once the brake is able to do that, then you can transfer it back to the throttle and you will get one of a couple of reactions. Either the car will slide up the track under throttle and you know that you waited not long enough, or it'll keep its line exactly where it is without having to turn the wheel anymore, and that is good. But what that does lead us into is number 3, the mid-corner throttle and steering wheel. The one thing that separates high-level oval drivers from lower-level oval drivers and the center of the corner is just the amount of input changes, steering changes, throttle changes that go throughout the center of the corner. My rule for myself when I'm driving in the center of the corner is that I want one motion off of my brake, one motion on my throttle, and no doubling back on any of that. If you find yourself pumping the throttle in the middle of the corner, not really knowing when to go or when to fully commit to full throttle, that could mean that you are actually hurting the rotation of your car throughout the entire second half of the corner. When you're able to achieve that neutral or maybe even a loose condition in the center of the corner, and then you modulate back and forth on the throttle, that can get the car to push back onto the right front tire and lose all of your progress on the rotation. But this is also the part of the corner that we can tie back to the beginning, because the better corner entry that we have and the easier it is to settle the car into the corner, the more that we will be able to have a consistently smooth corner center. The goal should always be one motion up on the gas. You can plateau it if you need to, say hold it at 50, 60, 70% if something is not going 100% according to plan, but you should never need to back off on the throttle when you have already reached a higher percentage. Just knowing how much you can get back on the throttle initially too can help with this process. There's 2 ways to do it. The objectively correct way is to just smoothly start from 0 and get to where you want to go as smooth of a curve as possible. I personally don't do that. I'm not that good. I'm not consistent enough at that particular technique. So what do? Well, I like to make it easier for my skill set, which is not particularly being smooth on the pedals, by finding what I like to call the Goldilocks throttle zone. This is the amount of throttle that you can add to the car with a full amount of steering in the center of the corner without having the car slide up the track. In all of the cars that I drive, Arca, Xfinity, trucks, other short track type cars, I have never found a Goldilocks throttle zone of under 50%. So when you're learning for yourself, you're able to enter the corner good, you're able to get the weight shift, immediately get back onto the throttle at 50%, and the car should not feel any sort of imbalance with that. But there are some combos and some tracks where you can put more throttle into it, all the way up to 100 sometimes. You can just mash it on certain setups. From there, you can be smooth on the way up from 60, and it is very important to, and that leads into our number 4, throttle and steering on corner exit. This can be the most tricky and inconsistent and most difficult part for newer oval racers, but with a couple sets of rules, this can become just as easy as anything else. My rule for corner exit throttle and steering is that they should be completely tied together like they were attached with a string. Yes, this is also something I talked about recently and something that Swelio talks about as well, the string theory, where you're connecting your steering and your throttle as if they were connected by a string, and if the string is too tight, then it'll snap. When we enter the corner, we are on the trail brake and not on the throttle, so the steering wheel can use up all of that resource as we turn to the left. As our weight transfers, once again, we find that Goldilocks zone, that equilibrium, where we are once again using that right rear resource perfectly. But from there on out, if we want to add any more throttle, we have to give up the other thing that is using that resource. So we have to turn the steering wheel back towards the center for every bit that we use the throttle above the Goldilocks zone. So hopefully that visualization helps some people, but the gist of it is that you want your throttle and your steering wheel to be perfectly in tune and choreographed together on corner exit to avoid any loose and spinny moments. And number 5 is not necessarily a new technique, but a revelation, you could say, based off of all the other techniques. And that is that this isn't just about how to make it easier for yourself and go fast. This is about how to save tires as well. Because think about it. If you're making it easy on yourself, you're probably also making it easy on your car. And if you're making it easy on your car, doesn't that mean that there is less force going into your tires? So yes, the concepts of simplifying the corner are actually just the basis of saving tires. If you're able to do all of this and maximize and optimize what the car gives you with these sets of rules, then you are still saving tires. It doesn't matter how fast or slow you're going. So now tire saving becomes not something that you're actively thinking about, but a result of what you're already doing. Just remember that if you are struggling, if it is difficult for you, there is probably a better way to get through the corner that makes it easier on you. I tell my students all the time when we run a practice session that their fastest lap will be their easiest lap. But let me know what you guys think down below if you have any other tips that make oval racing easier for you. Thank you all for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day. Hope to see you all on the track.